So good morning to wherever you are. We'll just start off. Just a quick agenda before we get into we get going. Basically, this presentation is just to cover a couple of new features relating to execution groups that we've added to our diagramming tool. With the intention that the first feature will be basically just including the information about the execution groups and how it sort of ties together with all the other real-time or runtime information that we're gathering, and then we're going to have a little bit of a chat about what we're going to do with it in the future, as far as including additional rules depending on our architecture. So just a little bit of looking back at what we've done previously. Previously, we've added some functionality around, or the functionality to be able to pick up some runtime information using what's called the generic code coverage tool. So the generic code coverage tool basically takes a bit of runtime information from a file configuration, merges that with your code, and gives you some feedback. So what we have for that in the diagrams we've generated is in our sample diagram, we take the code coverage tool information, which in our the browser version of Sonar looks like this, with a bit of summary information around which lines, for example, have been covered, and we extend that out into our diagrams. So what we've done for our diagrams is we've added some information around what actually is covered as far as what we see in our deployment. And so this here is a diagram. It's a fairly simple sort of project, just as an example, but it's basically showing that we have, for example, that one's a slope flow, that one's a queue flow driven by a queue. What we've taken is we've taken that diagram information and merged it with our runtime information about our code coverage. It gives us a little bit of information about what's been tested. Oops. So we'll just refresh that, just because it zoomed out on us. We turn our code coverage on, and what we can see here is we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 red squares, which indicates that that particular flow hasn't been tested, in a green square. So the green square represents message flows being run as part of our test cases, and the red square indicates flows that haven't been run as part of our test cases. So what we've done is taken that sort of approach for extracting and using execution group information. So what we have is the Java utility that you put your credentials and your location of your broker into. It will connect to your broker and produce what we call a runtime file. So we look here, we produce this runtime report. Oops. Actually, so there we have a class that generates. There's our Ant script that generates the runtime report, but we have a runtime XML, but basically gives us a bit of information about what's actually deployed in a particular broker in each particular execution group. So we can see here that report gives us back the execution groups, so it gives us an idea of what execution groups we have, and then for each execution group, it gives back the flows, sorry, the message flows that are deployed there. So what we can do is with that information, we can merge that information into our diagram. And what we have here is we've got a little bit of information about which flows are deployed to which execution group. So this diagram tells us that this particular backlog 2 message flow, which is reading a queue, is deployed to 2 execution groups, execution C and execution 1, and C and execution 4. And then we'll also see here we've got one called test1 flow, or test1 message flow, that isn't actually looks to be deployed anywhere. Again, we've got test2 is deployed to 1 execution group, which we can just jump into. So we can see we've got something that's triggered by an incoming SOAP request or an incoming HTTP request, and that triggers our flow. And then what we can see here, just a little bit more color and a little bit more visibility in the diagram. So we can see here we've got an execution group with no flows in it, and And this, for example, here we've got an execution group number 5 with 2 flows deployed into it. With the interesting thing here being that even though there are 2 flows into it, we've only know about one of our flows. Only one of those flows is actually in our source code. So we've got one flow deployed into the execution group that isn't actually deployed out of the project we're looking at. So we can jump through. So we can see there that those particular 2 flows, we've got 2 flows from those 2 separate execution groups. And you've got, again, 2 flows there in those different execution groups. And if we pick both of them, you can see just a combination of the deployments. So this gives us a little bit more information about how our flows are being used. So that's the first step, is just to be able to identify what's deployed where. And from an architectural or deployment perspective, we can now look at this bit of information and say, well, we know a little bit about our flows, maybe even from the comments that we've extracted about the flow, and also from the tips we have on each of the flows, say which ones are SOAP flows and which ones are queue flows, and we might have some idea about how they should be deployed. So we might have some sort of internal rule, some sort of architectural decision where we've said, well, all the queue flows need to be deployed to more than one execution group, because we want to be able to keep our runtimes running, or keep our business running while we do deployment. So we might decide to stop one execution group, redeploy to it, start that execution group back up, stop another execution group, or have the option to stop the other execution group, do the deployments to it, and start the execution group up. And that way we've got that load balancing approach of being able to provide business continuality while we do deployments, or if we're troubleshooting a particular execution group. And so this diagram gives us the idea of whether or not all our queue-based execution groups, or all our queue-based flows, are deployed to more than one execution group. Another example of how we might want to architecture or deploy our system is we might want to pick all the incoming and the outgoing file-based nodes. And we don't have any on this diagram here, but if we look at maybe another diagram that's got a bit more, let's just see if there's any file-based nodes in here. We can see a SOAP flow that writes to 2 queues. So we just go to so here we go, all input files. So all input files is deployed to collection node sample and file output node. Oops. So we see here this particular input, this particular SOAP flow has an incoming SOAP request and writes to file out. So what we might decide is that we have the information in this particular project. We might look at which flows read or write to files. So they may actually need to have some sort of enhanced privileges. And taking that information, we might want to decide that certain execution groups have file access privileges because they have a heightened user, or a user with a higher privilege level, and hence only those flows should be having those file-based nodes in them. Or only those execution groups should have those file-based flows with file-based nodes in them. And that way we can petition our system around having certain execution groups having different privileges to others, because they don't all need to be able to write to the file system. And that sort of information you can gather from these sorts of diagrams. So moving forward, the next piece of work, or next piece of functionality we're looking at, is to take the combination of the runtime information, which is something that we can definitely make use of, but then also including some architectural information. So, for example, what we're looking to is to create is a little bit of a summary about the rules that we might want to have for each of our execution groups. So, for example, we'll just pick one here that says, well, for all this particular execution group, whether we think it should be allowed to access the file system, with the intention that what we're going to do is take the runtime information, combined with the template information, and say, well, this particular execution group should be able to write to the file system. We'll look at the flows and what sort of things the flows are doing, whether or not they do need access to the file system, and merge that together and give you feedback on the Sonar console via via the rules to indicate where a flow is being deployed inappropriately, or where a flow should be deployed to a different execution group if it's only deployed to one, for example. And that way we can get that feedback into our desktop, or into our code improvement, so we can see what's wrong with our configuration and where we can improve it. So we've just got 1 or 2 minutes. We're running a few minutes early. We've just got 1 or 2 minutes for questions. So if there's no questions, I'll let everyone head off. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact me via our webpage, or contact me via Richard at bettercodingtools.com. Otherwise, we do actually have the ability to leave a message, or we do have now our online chat available certain times of the day when someone is available to answer any questions. So hopefully you enjoyed my presentation, and it's given you a little bit of food for thought around how you're deploying and how you're managing your execution groups, how you're managing your architecture. As I said, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your morning, and I will catch you another time. Thank you.